Welcome back. We're here for another episode of Culture Chat. We are joined today by Chris Caramonica, who is the Director of Facilities at Wynn Companies. And why I'm just extra excited about today is Chris and I went to middle school and high school together. So we have known each other for over 30 years. We didn't graduate 30 years ago, but as I was just reminded, it's been pretty close. But we were in DECA together. I don't even know if DECA still exists, but it's the business club. So we got to travel and go to state competitions up in freezing Rochester and do some cool stuff. So Chris, thanks so much for joining Andy and I, and just a real pleasure to see you.
Rachel, Andy, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be joining you. And Rachel, it really is so great to see and talk to you again after so long. And yes, DECA still is one of the premier high school business clubs. I have some exposure to it adjacently through the apartment industry, but I know some of my daughter's friends are in the local DECA chapter, and they still do their regional and national competition. So it brought back a lot of memories for me. When you reached out and asked me to be a guest, because we did spend a lot of time together in that club and competing, and definitely on those trips we had a really nice good friendship and good time together. So
yeah, it was so much fun. I still every now and again will send Mrs. Singer, Deanne, our advisor, a note. It's probably been a while, and I probably should do an outreach. But yeah, we had a good time. What did you do for DECA? Do you remember? Did you write papers? Did you do the verbals? What did you do?
I wrote papers. I think one of the things I got pretty far in to the national competition was one of the entrepreneurship categories, and it was basically creating your own business. Now, in high school, I had zero desire to be an entrepreneur, and almost 30 years later, I still don't want to be an entrepreneur, even though I've done some entrepreneurial type things, but being in that kind of put me on a path, I think, for where I ended up eventually. And I was thinking about it recently when we were talking, when you invited me to be on your show today, is something as simple as a club in high school that was about business professionalism showed me about business.
Yeah.
That was not something that I was really accustomed to. My father was a police officer. My mother was a secretary at a travel agency. So it was, none of my, I had a lot of friends that worked in, Rachel, you know this because I'm sure you had a lot of the same friends. Their parents worked on Wall Street. They were bankers. They worked in the healthcare industry in New York City. They just worked in big business, and that's not where I came from. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I didn't know that. I mean, I think that's what's so awesome about DECA and why they probably started too, but just to make sure that everybody had some exposure to the business space. So I grew up, my dad was an entrepreneur, still is an entrepreneur. He does not want to retire because he's like, why should I get to work for myself and do the things. We're like, it's time to wrap it up. But so I too wrote papers, mainly because Mrs. Singer said, look, if you write a paper, and they were long papers, like 30 pages, and this was obviously before AI, so we actually had to write them. And I still have them. So they're in my garage in a Tupperware thing that my husband says, really, we're moving with these again? I'm like, yes, we are. Because I don't have the CD that they were stored on, the floppy disk.
It's funny that you said that, because my mother about a year ago gave me the blue box, I call it, which... The blue box was just a memory box that I had, and I actually found 2 of my DECA papers in there.
That's awesome! Oh my gosh, I hope you read them or had your daughter read them or something. But
I'll have to scan them to you. Maybe you and I can scan them to each other and share.
That would be so fun. But that was the thing. So write the big paper, mostly because nobody else does it. So the competition's pretty small. And for somebody who was terribly insecure and had no confidence, I was like, well, if I'm going to try this thing, let me do something where the competition's less. So when we would go to the state competition, there would be maybe like 5 or 6 people in the category. And Andy, are you familiar with DECA? Do you know what DECA is?
I don't think we had that on the West Coast. At least not in Orange County.
Yeah, maybe you did, but you just didn't.
It's called something else.
We'll forgive you.
Okay.
But we would go to, in New York, there'd be like 5, 6 people in the category. We'd go and interview in front of our panel and tell them, I was in the marketing category, so I would set up, like I had to write about the marketing campaign or marketing plan for a specific company. And sometimes it was an imaginary company too. And so we'd go and like interview. Great exposure to have to get in front of people and actually talk, which I think that too set us up for success and being out there and just being comfortable at a pretty young age, when I know I certainly was never going to get on stage. But then we went to nationals. So we went to Anaheim. We went to Anaheim one year. We went to Orlando one year. We went to St. Louis one year. And then there was another one which I lost, so I didn't get to go to that other one, but it wasn't my senior year.
I did Anaheim and Orlando. I think I got into the nationals for both of those. But it was, an interesting, opportunity. And I look at it now as having a teenage daughter who's a junior in high school. I'm trying to I don't force her to do anything. I just share my experiences. And she loves hearing those stories, and she has no problem talking to a room of 50 people. And I did, right? But, that kind of exposure for me as a young person helped started to build those foundation blocks, later in my career. And I'm sure both of you have very similar stories.
It's interesting though. So what do you attribute to your daughter being able to get out there and talk? Because I have one of those too, that's just a born performer.
I think it's because of what I do now. I really do. I think that she sees the Chris Karamonica now, not the Chris Karamonica from 30 years ago. She sees somebody that is very strong and confident. She has seen somebody that has been the awkward wallflower that was very quiet. She doesn't know that person. She only knows the person who is a podcast guest or has stood on national stages talking to, industry peers. She hears me on the phone talking to coworkers and on business meetings. So she has, just through observation, I don't expose her to that. I don't do the daddy's going to work in his office thing. Or, can you put on your headphones? I have to have a meeting in the car. She hears it and she's in it, and I'll get off a call and she'll look at me and she'll be like, yeah, it's a great boost to my ego. She's like, that was awesome. And so that kind of helps too, but she's seeing how I interact with people and how it's made me successful. And I think in turn, she has no fear. Plus the only child thing.
Oh, yeah.
She only ever talks to adults.
Yeah, I think that's a real thing too. Same with my kiddo. Yeah, there is something about being exposed to that. But what you're talking about, one of the things that Andy and I talk a lot about too is we work with other leaders, and we work with folks at all levels. So, we have a group where we have project managers and program managers, and really what we instill is leading from where you sit. And showing up as a leader is so much like the power of role modeling, which, is really, I think, what you're also describing here. I doubt it was like a switch. One thing happened where you're like, I'm not a wallflower, although that's funny because I would never thought of you that way. And maybe you were talking about me because that's how I felt.
No.
But you gotta love the high school thing. But what transpired? What do you think changed for you to find that confidence, and have your leadership voice?
Yeah, I think it started for me right after college. I think I was very quiet in high school and even in college to some degree. In high school, I liked to be the guy behind the guy. I wasn't the president. I was the chief of staff, for, lack of a better term, right? I didn't have to be the one that was out in front of everybody. I like to be pushing people along for my own personal gain. I'm not gonna lie through.
Sure. Yeah.
Did the same thing in high school and college. Then I kind of got into the professional world, and I think I got into a job. I started as a theater manager, or an assistant theater manager at Blue Man Group in New York City. I came from an arts background, an arts degree, and there was a couple of instances in my first year, which was I graduated college in 2001, in May of 2001. So I think that between June and September, there was a lot of things that I was coming into my own, but then September 11th happened. I had to lead. I was an assistant theater manager. Theater had shut down in New York City. I mean, along with everything else. And, Blue Man Group, for your audience that doesn't know Blue Man Group, you should. But, it's an internationally popular off-Broadway theater troupe. but their New York operations were below 14th Street. We were in the dead zone of everything being shut down for several weeks. But our company still paid us. Our company let us come to work. Even though there was no shows, even though there was literally no income for close to 8 weeks post 9/11. And that was really huge. And we had to work. And I think that being a leader at that point, being responsible for people and being on the phone and talking to people and, being this fresh out of college person going through this really difficult experience with peers and people that worked for me at 21, 22 years old. That was the light. I'll be honest. I think that was the light switch. And I think from that moment on, I was like, oh, I'm a leader. And then everything I've done for the last 23 years since then has just been building on that light switch moment of these people need me.
You show up for others.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's funny because in a lot of experience, in some experiences, you find leaders that all of a sudden just think to themselves that I'm in charge of people. Mm-mm. Like, so I love what you just said there. Like, these people need me. Like this, oh, okay, I just need to step in because this is a requirement and I understand that I'm here for them and not the opposite of that. And I think that shows incredible leadership acumen, which I think we don't see enough of. I think in a number of environments, we see people who are leaders because they're technically good. They technically know how to do XYZ job, but you start to realize that when you get into a leadership position, and particularly as you ascend higher and higher, it becomes so much less about the technical. And it becomes mostly about how you can really engage people, how you can invigorate and excite people, support people, all the things. People at the end of the day. It's great to hear you talk about that because it's really nice to see more of that, right? Realizing that that's a people job, not a technical job.
Yeah, and I think I had a unique experience coming at it from a theater background. I went to school for arts management. I worked with theater people for through even going back to high school. I was part of our drama club and musicals. And then in high school, I was part of the theater department. In college, I was part of our theater program. And artists have a just different approach. And I've worked with some amazing people in the professional and business world. And I've worked with some amazing artists and founders and leaders and visionaries, for lack of a better term. And they think differently, but they're doing the same thing. It's just they're leading differently. So I had a very unique perspective on leadership, I would say the first 8 years of my professional career. And then by the time I actually put the rubber to the road with, oh, this is business, like there's no audience anymore. Mm-hmm. Everybody's my audience. There's nobody's paying, for an hour and a half of entertainment. I work in multifamily housing. When they pay my organizations, however that comes through, they're residents. They're 365 days. They're no longer 2 hours at a time. Hey, welcome. Did you have fun? Bye. Like right. There's none of that anymore. It's right. You're here. They live with us. The artist mindset. I'm not an artist. I wish I'd be, to some degree I am, but to be surrounded by artistic people is something that we're losing. That I see. A lot of people we're losing the arts, and I was just very beneficial to be surrounded by it at a very integral time, I think, in my professional development.
No, I was just going to pick up on the artist piece because I do think it is interesting how important our ability to be creative, to have open minds and think openly. We sort of forgot that, or when I say we, the collective we of, okay, we have to cut funding, so we're going to cut art. Let's double down on math. And it's like, yes, I think mathematics and science and it's important, but they acted like art wasn't important. And I think you can kind of see that now. Possibly some may say it's intentional, but I think you can see that now because people don't question anything. Their minds don't work in any kind of inquisitive, open kind of manner. It's sort of like...
Or the gray area. Right?
Or in the gray, someone has told me a thing. Yep,
and,
exactly.
and creative problem solving,
Exactly. And I think those are linked. And to be honest with you, Chris, I don't ever think I've thought about it till this very moment about this link of, oh, now I get why it's so difficult to go in and try and help people see through a different lens. It's because we've completely gotten rid of that in school, and people don't know how to flex that muscle anymore.
Not to belabor the point of the arts, but I work with a lot of people who have only ever worked in affordable or housing, multifamily housing, apartment industry. That's all they know. They started right out of right out of college. They've been doing it for 25, 30, 40 years. So when they say to me, like, we have to think creatively, and then they give me their creative idea, I'm like, that is not even close to creative.
Here's the box. You're still in the box.
It's just like, you just made your box bigger. You're still in the said box, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I worked with people that were like, hey, things are a little dull in the second act. How about we rewrite the entire part, write new music, and do do a scathing review on iPads? And they did it, right? And increased the longevity of Blue Man Group long past. I mean, they're about to close in New York City. Breaks my heart. That was a little itty bitty 100-seat theater, and that has gone on to be and it was just a bunch of guys painting themselves blue, talking about, they've redone the show in New York City 4 times in 3 decades.
Wow.
That's enormous.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a company going, we're going to scrap everything that
Redo
we
it all.
had,
Yeah.
and we're just going to start from the ground up? It can only happen in the arts. It can only happen with Broadway revivals or off-Broadway shows that come back. Like, you're not seeing the same version of Chicago that you originally saw on Broadway, right? It reinvigorates itself every couple of years with a new cast or, just a new way to do it. So.
But isn't that also true for business? I mean, that's probably why there's stagnation. It's why companies end up, shutting doors.
Exiting stage left.
Yeah, is because they don't realize, oh, goodness gracious, my audience is no longer interested in this. I'm no longer resonating with my audience. How do we do something different? I think people really do, again, going back to this link, people really do get stuck. I think the good companies are the ones that are like, oh, well, we used to believe, I'm going to make it up, we used to believe in Coca-Cola. Now I see smoothies are a thing. We're going to see how we can make really great smoothies and just completely reinvent themselves.
Now we make a Coca-Cola smoothie. Right? It's like we take little steps.
It's the bigger box.
Yeah, right.
We make new Coke. We take original Coke and then we make new Coke. And then we say, people didn't like new Coke. And so we're going to go back to original Coke. But we can do a whole thing.
But we talk a lot about that too. I mean, and this is the link, right, between having that creative problem solving and not being afraid to try something different. Like, what if we did just scrap that process and see what a whole new thing looks like? So, Andy and I do spend time talking with folks about how are you creating that environment where people really are getting creative and sharing those ideas and, throwing spaghetti on the wall. But there's so much fear, or so maybe that's the question. Is it fear, or is it just a lack of knowledge, a lack of that creative thinking, a lack of having that experience in the arts or whatever to just try something on? I don't know.
I think that there's definitely fear. I mean, there's fear for everybody, right? Nobody wants to be the one to raise their hand. And that goes all the way back to high school, right? And and the person that raises their hand is either a genius or they're an idiot. They're not
ridicule.
like, oh, okay. They're ridiculed. It's one or the other, and that still exists in my day. And I can tell you that as somebody who often raises their hand, that I'm either the genius in the room or I'm the idiot in the room. But I'm okay with that now, right? But I think a lot of people are afraid, right? They don't want to say something that goes against the grain. They don't want to embarrass other people that they're working with. And bring up something. When I got into my current company, Win Companies, and I've been with them a little over 9 years, I was in my mid-30s, not long in the apartment industry to begin with, but I sat at a table with the other 5 directors of facilities at my organization. We're a national multifamily housing company, and they had all been with the company over 30 years. Some of them had even babysat our current CEO, right?
Wow.
And it's, right.
Wow.
So here I am,
That's a family.
the new kid at the table, right? Literally, they were all in their, at that time, a lot of them were in their, early to mid 60s. They'd been with the organization. They had helped build the organization. They were porters. So anytime I opened my mouth, it was like, well, what do you know? We wrote the book. Like, how do you go to Shakespeare and be like, I think you could have done something a little bit better in that second act of in Henry VIII, right?
Yeah.
Nobody would do that, right? Because he wrote the book. So that was a huge challenge. But that is something that no matter how long you've been in a role, you have to do it because somebody has to challenge that status quo. Somebody has to say, are we doing the right thing? And if at the end of the day, the answer is, yes, we're still on the right track, and yes, we're still doing the right thing, awesome. But if you don't answer the question, if you don't ask the question, everybody's just going to keep enjoying that time in that nice little box.
And also, like with folks who have been there forever, what you're questioning is what they created, right? Like you said, they wrote the book. So how do you make that not personal? Because we all, whether it's cultural or personal, I don't, it's hard to parse these things out, but is it, how does that not feel personal? How are you not attacking me and the work that I've done and my ego and, because I care so much about this. I created this. My identity is associated with it. So when you're asking a question about why we do something this way, or have we thought about it, or
life's work, their life's work, their career, how they built their financial stability for their family. You ask one question like, well, why do we do it this way? And I'm sure you hear this a lot. Well, we all do. Well, it's how we've always done it. And then you have, if somebody asks why, it's like, well, because. Well, that because is not the answer to a question. It's a connector to a reason, not an answer.
It's the start, not the end.
Yeah.
Well, and it's so funny that you say that because that really is, a lot of people don't understand the why. So you have someone who, whether they created it or they came in and saw it working, but they've just been doing it and following it and following it. And you ask why. And for Rachel and I, we love to link things back to company values, to customer needs, to those types of things. And so it's like, okay, show me how this links with the company values, or tell me how this is a benefit to the customer. And it's like the landmines, how we try to navigate through the landmines is, this really isn't personal to you. This was amazing at the time. We now have this, we have more information, we have people giving us, you have customers giving us feedback, you have your employees giving you feedback. This is why we need to look at how we evolve this. It's not a change as much as it's, we want to keep doing this, and it's yes and, as Rachel loves to say. And so I think fear is the guiding principle around, oh my gosh, I'm no longer going to be of value. Oh my gosh, this thing that I created is, I'm obsolete. Like that type of thing. And I think it's really trying to build the confidence around that's not entirely true. The entire universe has made a change, right? I mean,
and it's also like not your value. This is the thing, right? You hold on to stuff so tightly that what you did here is now so interwoven in my value. And your value actually was that process you went through to create that. So knowing that you can do that again, knowing that you can think outside the box, knowing you can walk through that, knowing that you can understand the why or figure out what the question even is, that's the value. The rest of this execution stuff, that's always changing, that we have to continuously evolve in. So it's more like, how do we get folks to embrace the process and see their value in that versus just what the end result is at that moment, that snapshot in time, because the goalposts always change too.
I think for me it was I just kept doing it, and I've done it for 9 years. When I was sitting at that table with all of my peers, people with the exact same title as me with way more experience, I just kept asking, and I walked out of every meeting going, they hate me.
Well, but this is a very, very common thing, because we coach a lot of folks where their leaders will tell us they need to take their seat at the table, right? So their managers, their leaders are saying, I want Susie to have that seat at the table. I want to hear what she thinks, but she is so paralyzed to speak up because of fear, imposter, whatever her stuff is. All right, but I want her to take a seat. So how did you decide for yourself, like, I am going to speak up, I'm going to leave this meeting thinking that they hate me or whatever, and keep showing up to do that?
Stupidity.
Ignorance is bliss, but not really. Not really.
I think it was my stupidity in my making recommendations or questions, because that's how it was perceived, right? When you're going against the status quo, somebody in the room is going, well, that's stupid. They're not saying it out loud, but they're thinking it, right? So I think of it as, I'm going to be stupid right now, because somebody at the table is going to go, you're being stupid. And hopefully not out loud. Thankfully, nobody ever said it out loud. But I think
it shows
it
on
was,
their face.
Right. But one, I was showing vulnerability because I was able to ask questions that nobody else was asking. And I truly was doing it at a place from ignorance, because these people had 30 years in the organization on me. Here I am I was hired into a role. There were obviously people that didn't think that I was, right for the role, or I was too young for the role, or I didn't have the experience, which I think any leader is, any manager is going to have that when you get to a certain point. But I wasn't afraid. So I would stupidly ask, like, well, why are we doing it that way? Like, have we thought about doing it this? And then I leaned on something that none of them thought about, was my theater background. I had something they didn't have. They only knew apartments. They only knew customer service for people who lived at their place. I knew short-term customer service, which is it's a totally different approach, right? I knew more about thinking, I don't want to belabor it, but I thought more about being creative than why are we doing it that way? So I just kept doing it. And
so
every once in a while, I got to win.
Yeah.
I got to win. And every win I got, I went back to my blackboard at home and I marked it. Okay, I got 1 win, 10 losses. And eventually the wins, because I kept doing it, because I just had confidence, the wins started to become greater than the losses.
I love it. There's so many things that I want to unpack on, but Andy, you go first on what I know.
No, mine will be super quick, is because I think you and I will probably picked up on a lot of the same things. So I'm just going to talk about this last thing, and that is perseverance, right? And I think people we talked about fear. I think people can sometimes lack perseverance, like understanding that everything sort of goes in peaks and valleys. Very few things are linear. And so sometimes you're going to get a win and sometimes you're not. And just because your idea wasn't selected this time doesn't mean that every idea you have is horrible and nobody likes you and you should never have an idea ever again. It just means this idea wasn't it. So come with the idea next time. So that perseverance, I think, whether we're talking from a leadership standpoint, whether we're talking, as aspiring leader, to become a leader, aspiring to be a leader, this perseverance, this recognition that not every idea is going to be the idea that people, connect with. Just keep going. Just keep going. Be able to back up your stuff, but just keep going. That perseverance will always pull you through.
And I thought you were going to talk also about celebrating the wins. Like, we do not celebrate the wins enough. So the fact that you had a practice where you were literally like, got one, nailed it, had that reflection time to really be able to celebrate it, goes a really long way in building up that confidence to go out there and do it again.
Yeah, and then the other thing I did, and Rachel, Andy said it about you a little bit ago, is the yes and. I'm a big fan of yes and. When opportunities present themselves, I say yes, and what's next, right? Mm-hmm. And whether that's work or professional or personal life, I do, all of it. And I actually had somebody say to me recently, I sit on several committees with our National Apartment Association. And we had our big conference recently, and somebody sat on me next to the bus and said, "Oh, so what are you doing?" And I rattled off the 5 different committees and 2 task force and a board of directors that I'm on. And I'm not saying that to brag, because every opportunity that came to me, I just said yes. And she goes, "I think you're doing yes and wrong." And I said, "You're right. I don't know how to say no." Yeah. But I did it for 2. I've volunteered and doing these things outside of my normal work life. They're part of my work life, but not my job. I'm not paid for them. I'm doing them to keep myself engaged. because we all have jobs that are at times they're monotonous. You're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing every month, every week, every year. What I've done is I've found moments where I can do something different. And I'm able to break that monotony, and I'm exposed to new ideas, new people, and creativity, because I'm taking myself outside of my sphere of influence and the people that I work with, and we only know what we know, and I'm learning what everybody else knows.
That's right.
And then I can still ask stupid questions and say, well, Johnny across the street is doing it this way. Why aren't we doing it the way that Johnny does?
Yeah.
And they go, oh, we didn't know that Johnny was doing it that way across the street. Well, guess what I did? Because I went outside.
Right.
I just went outside. All I did was
Surround
just open the
yourself
door and
with
went for a
other
walk.
people who are not just the same,
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what's so important too, you know, where we talk about diversity of thought. You know, we don't spend too much time in the DE&I space, but we do talk about the importance of diversity of thought, and that is exposing yourself to other groups, other areas, you know, and not being afraid to do that. And I think what I'm hearing really loudly from you, Chris, is this learner mindset. Like, you are okay to not know, and that has given you the confidence to ask the questions, and just know that, again, your value is not in knowing all the things. It's going through the process of being open to learning and hearing and trying different approaches.
Yeah.
And I think at some point we have to, like, if I could do any major culture shift, it would be this very thing of, you don't have to know everything. As a matter of fact, it's weird. It's weird if you go into every single room and you're the person that knows the most in that room. That's weird. Get into a different
Well, that's what they say. If you're the smartest person in the room,
get into a different
find another room.
You're in the wrong room.
Because
Yeah.
you can't constantly be in that state, because you won't grow and you won't learn and you won't develop. And it's precisely, I think, kind of what you mentioned at the start when you came in. Everyone's like, you know, I'm using my own terms, like, shut up, kid, sit down over there in the corner, kid, you know.
Yeah.
Like, we've been doing this thing for however long, and it's like, yes, you have been doing this for a long time, so you have exceptional institutional knowledge. What you don't have is what the rest of the world's been doing. So this idea that we only want people and we only want to promote people from within and we only want that, it's like, you could do that, but it becomes challenging because people aren't like you, Chris. They don't venture out to go understand, and, you know, the learner mindset, as Rachel mentioned, to go understand, how are other people doing this thing? Maybe we're not the best at it. Even if we're the best at it, I want to still go learn and see what other people are doing so I can bring that back. Most people aren't that way. You really have to have this mix of, you know, people who've been in other organizations, people who've been other places, and can come and bring some insight in to help you, as Rachel mentioned, that diversity of thought. We get too comfortable in the idea of, we have to know everything and nobody knows better than we, the collective we, do. And you end up stagnant. Again, we still talk about that creativity, that innovation. You end up very stagnant because you only know what you know. There's not even a negative thing to that, because how can you know something you don't know? You can only know what you know. And no matter what, it's always limited if you're not, you know, you really got to be open to learning, continuous learning, we love to say, continuous improvement.
Well, and I think of too, like the individual person on that who always has to know, the amount of pressure that one must feel to have to always have the answer and be that person in the room. You know, if that's the way you define your value, that becomes a sum-zero game. Like, that's a lot of pressure to have to carry, which is why people respond to leaders who are vulnerable, like you said, who have humility, who don't know all the things, who are asking the questions to bring others along. This is what creates followers.
Yeah. I think no less than 5 times a day do I say these words out loud. What do you think? I have 7 direct reports, and I work with another, 8 executive leaders, that I talk to on a regular basis, and I say to them, and I say to my team, like, what do you think? And sometimes I don't even know the answer when I ask that question. I'm asking the question because I I can't give you an answer. So I'm hoping that you got one and you're just afraid to say it because I don't even know what to do,
Or you're going to say something that then is going to get us to the answer.
Yeah.
That was like a big shift for me to finally take my seat at the table. I think it was my coach who shined this light on for me, but it's like, even if you ask a question or bring something up, it might not be the answer, and that's okay. But you're going to spark a thought in somebody else that's going to get us to the answer. And that was a big shift for me. Like, that really helped shift my perspective on why I needed to speak up, on how I could then share my ideas. Because again, it didn't have to be the end answer, it didn't have to be the right answer. It had to be enough to keep the dialogue going that then we were getting to an answer, to something.
Yeah, and I think it's so powerful too, because I think we know that the more people are empowered to give their perspective, give their input, it's like the better solutioning you get to problems. Because sometimes the problems, Chris, quite frankly, they don't have answers. We have to actually
Or they don't have one
solve-
answer.
Or like I remember I worked at a hospital system out in California, and the CEO sat us down and we were doing this integration with another hospital and whatever, and he was like, you all are waiting for a white horse to come through here and give the solution. He was like, this group is the white horse. Like, there isn't an answer today. The answer has to come from this group. And the empowerment that you feel in like, right, okay, there's no one coming to save the day. We as this collective group get to provide this input on how we're going to do this thing. And quite frankly, some of the solutions were great. Some of the solutions we tried were horrible. Some of the solutions were horrible, got implemented, and we had to redo them, retry, So like, even the process of failure, we like to say, let's fail fast, learn from what we need to learn what we need to learn, and get ourselves moving in the correct direction again. Because even in the failures, we get this opportunity to gain additional knowledge, additional understanding. And I think that, again, we go back to the fear topic. People are afraid to fail, afraid to do anything that might be considered wrong. But sometimes the best solutions come out of the wrong. So I love that you're constantly in that fostering of, you tell me.
Yeah. It also comes from a place, I work in facility maintenance, right? So my job is to fix broken things, right? And that's how I started, right? And even when I was in the theater business, I was a facilities director, I was a facilities manager. If something broke, it was my job to fix it. Well, that's pretty simple when you have a piece of equipment, right? We'll use something simple like your car. Your car's making a rattling noise. Well, it didn't make a rattling noise when it was built. So, okay, identify what's wrong with it. Identify what needs to get repaired. Where it gets more complicated is when you're talking about business and systems and processes, where there's not a broken piece per se. There's something out of alignment that is not as obvious as a loose screw. So I get to see things from very black and white as a maintenance professional of, this is broken, this needs to get fixed. But I've also had the privilege of learning and you said it a little earlier, what's the gray? Is it rattling? What's it rattle? Why is this broken? Why is this process broken? Why is the system broken? Why isn't the customer not happy? Why are our teams not happy? What can we do better? And it's not as simple as tightening a screw or a bolt.
Exactly.
So I get both sides of
more
it too, which is kind of
complicated,
cool.
but also multiple ways.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There is
I was
no
gonna say,
one right answer.
You've got to
So
throw.
what do
You've got to throw
what do you
about
like most
15
about your job?
things. No, I was saying sometimes you got to throw 15 things against the wall, and maybe 2 of them work. But you had to try all 15 to even figure out the 2.
So what's the favorite thing about your job? What do you love most about the work that you get to do?
It may sound cliche, but because I hear a lot of people say it, my job is never the same ever. In 16 years in the apartment industry, I can literally say that no single day has been identical. And that's huge. I think of friends who are accountants or friends that work in government jobs where they're filing the same paperwork week after week and month after month. I don't have that, right? I have things that I'm supposed to be doing, and that I do, but there's no set routine. And then for me, the other thing I like about it, as weird as it is, it's that creativity, because I'm constantly flipping between the how do I fix this and how can I make it better? And those are two very different things. So yeah, for me, it's every day is different, and I can kind of do my own thing. I can kind of just, am I going to fix something today, or am I going to make something better today?
I love that lens, and I feel like that's a great place. Are you going to fix it, or are we going to make it better?
Sometimes you have to fix it. Sometimes that's all you got to do.
Yeah.
But sometimes you got to make it better.
And it could be both, right?
Yeah.
When you're fixing it, we do make it better, or when we fix it, how do we not let this happen again? All right, so that's making things better than where we found them. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to hear your perspective. Tell us a little bit about your podcast and what you're going to be talking about the next time you're on the main stage.
Sure. So I have a podcast called Beyond the Work, Tales in Multifamily Maintenance. It's geared towards the multifamily maintenance, multifamily apartment industry, but everybody has lived in an apartment or has had a friend that's lived in an apartment. Everybody's got a maintenance tale to tell. So I like to share those stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then hopefully through leadership lessons like we're talking about today, that we can actually grow it. I'm a national educator and speaker on top of my full-time job, on top of my volunteerism, and I like to go to local and state conferences, and I'll talk about any topic from repairs and maintenance of appliances all the way through promoting your maintenance team members and industry professionals, as well as just general leadership. Because one of the things that we're lacking specifically in maintenance in our industry is actually next gen leaders. So I'm hoping that I could be a voice to show people. I started out as an on-site maintenance supervisor, and over a decade and a half, I'm a director of facilities that oversees 10,000 apartments in 4 states and 90 different communities. So I'm hoping that I can bring that message to others and lift up that next generation.
Well, you are certainly inspiring, and we're so grateful that you're out there doing the work and having the conversations with people. We too are trying to make kinder cultures one workplace at a time, one work environment at a time. So it's wonderful to see you and to chat with you.
Well, Rachel, Andy, thank you so much for having me today. It was a real pleasure for me, not only to catch up with an old friend, but to have some great conversations about, my leadership journey and what more people should be focusing on in their business lives. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you, Chris, too.
I know. Thanks, Andy.
Well, until next time, take good care.